String Quartet number 8 in C minor, Opus 110, 1960. Dmitri Dmitrievich Shostakovich seemed to have a major, big-time Communist Party-inspired crisis just about every 12 years. In 1936, it was the appearance of the Muddle Instead of Music article and his subsequent near purge. In 1948, it was his censure and blacklisting at the hands of Andrei Zhdanov and the Central Committee of the Communist Party. 1960 brought about another such crisis, although this time the crisis was precipitated by Shostakovich himself. During the late 1950s, Shostakovich was increasingly used by the Soviet authorities as a sort of artistic figurehead, meant to represent the supposedly free Soviet intelligentsia. In 1960, Nikita Khrushchev decided to make Shostakovich the chairman of the newly founded RSFSR, the Russian Union of Composers. It was a huge honor, and apparently Shostakovich felt that it was a position that would make him finally and for all time unassailable, untouchable, unpurgeable, and of equal importance, would guarantee the safety and success of his now two grown children, Galina, 24 years old, and Maxim, 22 years old. There was only one catch. To take the position, he had to join the Communist Party, something Shostakovich had long sworn he would never, ever, under any circumstances, ever do. Well, he did. He did join, telling his friends that he signed the necessary papers while under the influence of alcohol, SUI, signing under the influence. For weeks, for months afterwards, Shostakovich was almost hysterical with self-loathing. Lev Lebedinsky, musicologist, folklorist, and friend of Shostakovich, recalled, quote, "I will never forget some of the things he said that night before his induction into the party, sobbing hysterically. I'm scared to death of them. You don't know the whole truth. From childhood, I've always had to do things I didn't want to do. I've been a whore and always will be a whore." He often lashed at himself in strong words, unquote. Likewise, Shostakovich's great friend Isaac Glickman remembered, and we quote Glickman. "Early on the morning of June 29, 1960, Dmitri Dmitrievich rang and asked me to come and see him immediately. When I saw him, I was struck by his pained and confused expression. He quickly led me into the bedroom and limply sank on the bed and started crying, weeping out loud. In horror, I wondered if something dreadful had happened to one of the children. In response to my questions, he mumbled through his tears, 'They have been hounding me! They have been pursuing me!' I had never seen Dmitri Dmitrievich in such a state. He was quite hysterical. I gave him a glass of cold water, which he drank with his teeth chattering, and he gradually calmed down. About an hour later, he took hold of himself sufficiently to tell me that he had been forced by Pospelov and Khrushchev to join the party," unquote. Shostakovich's String Quartet number 8 in C minor, Opus 110, was completed on July 14th, Bastille Day of 1960, during the midst of his crisis over joining the Communist Party. It is in every way a remarkable piece. 5 days after he completed it, Shostakovich wrote Isaac Glickman, quote, "I've just finished an ideologically deficient quartet that nobody needs. I figured that when I die, it's not likely anyone will write a quartet dedicated to my memory, so I decided to write it myself. You could even write on the cover of this string quartet, dedicated to the memory of the composer of this quartet," unquote. Now, there's more than just black humor and irony in this statement. According to Lev Lebedinsky, Shostakovich intended his 8th string quartet to be his final work, as he planned to commit suicide. I quote Lebedinsky. "Shostakovich purchased a large number of sleeping pills. He played the quartet to me on the piano and told me with tears in his eyes that it was his last work. I managed to remove the pills from his jacket pocket and gave them to his son, Maxim. I pleaded with him not to let his father out of his sight. During the next few days, I spent as much time as possible with Shostakovich until I felt the danger of suicide had passed," unquote. Dedicated to the memory of the victims of fascism and war, Shostakovich's 8th Quartet is in reality dedicated to a particular victim of fascism, namely Shostakovich himself. It is an entirely autobiographical work, written start to finish in an astonishing 3 days. In the same letter to Isaac Glickman quoted but moments ago, Shostakovich wrote, and we quote, "The main theme of the quartet is my monogram, DSCH, or D E flat C B, that is, my initials in German notation." Let's hear a little bit of the first movement, the opening of the quartet, based as it is entirely on the 4 pitches that for Shostakovich represent his name. Look, Shostakovich could not have more explicitly said, "This music is about me," if he had actually put his photograph on the first page of the score. As it turns out, Shostakovich's 8th Quartet is a virtual autobiography. Again, in the same letter to Isaac Glickman, Shostakovich wrote, again we quote, "The quartet makes use of themes from my works and the revolutionary song, Tormented by Grievous Bondage. My own themes are the following. From the First Symphony, the 8th Symphony, the Piano Trio No. 2, the First Cello Concerto, and Lady Macbeth. Wagner's Funeral March from Götterdämmerung and the second theme from the first movement of Tchaikovsky's 6th Symphony are also hinted at. And I forgot, there's also a theme from my 10th Symphony. Quite something, this little miscellany. The pseudo-tragedy of the quartet is so great that while composing it, my tears flowed as abundantly as urine after downing half a dozen beers. On arriving home, I have tried playing it twice and have shed tears again," unquote. Look, we can identify these themes until we're blue in the ears. I'll point out a couple of them with the understanding that they are brilliantly buried, subsumed within this musical retrospective of Shostakovich's own life. For example, the violent, screaming, frenzied second movement pounds away on the Shostakovich motive, the one we just heard again, until about 1 minute into the movement, the frenzied Jewish dance music from the Piano Trio No. 2 bursts forth in octaves in the 2 violins. Shostakovich has literally composed his own Totentanz, his own dance of death. Wagner's funeral music from Götterdämmerung, the twilight of the gods, makes an appropriately violent statement about the deaths of those who would be gods, Hitler and Stalin. Let's compare Wagner and Shostakovich, starting with the Wagner, Götterdämmerung, Siegfried's Death and Funeral March of 1876. And now, please, Shostakovich String Quartet number 8 in C minor, movement 4. Lev Lebedynsky, who removed those sleeping pills from Shostakovich's coat, wrote this, and we quote, "Shostakovich was the only Soviet composer who expressed his hatred of the totalitarian regime in his music. Despite the fear that he might be destroyed for his views, he continued his struggle, following in the footsteps of the great humanists of the past. Often, he was compelled for the purpose of self-defense to disguise his music and his views. As a result, he was often misunderstood, even by those who shared his attitudes. Their lack of understanding and unjust accusations caused him considerable pain. His 8th Quartet is his autobiography," unquote. The 8th Quartet is one of Shostakovich's great masterworks and has been considered so since it was premiered on October 9th of 1960. Wrote the composer Heinrich Neuhaus, who attended the premiere, and we quote, "It is music of absolute genius. I was shaken and I cried."